Swedish fund.
Yeah.
So what was the USAID connection?
We
Not that we're interviewing yet, but I mean, I'm just...
there was a project called USAID Profit, which was a economic growth program that was kind of targeting the same sort of stuff that we were doing now. But when that finished, there was sufficient donor interest around to say, well, we don't want to see that kind of initiative stop. So what we did was to form a non-profit company, which is what Musika is, and basically the staff of Musika, the technical staff of Musika, are those that came out to the profit program. But we're not a project anymore. We're a company.
Okay.
And we have been given funding by the Swedish Embassy to continue and upscale the kind of work that we were doing under profit.
So that works. We just leave USAID out of it.
Yeah.
I'll probably start off by asking you just give me a couple minutes on how you got to here. Mm-hmm. You know, what your story is.
Yeah.
That always helps. You about ready, Chris?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. We're here with Rob Monroe from Musika. Is that how you pronounce it? Musika. Yeah. Sorry. And we're in Zambia, in Lusaka, the capital. And Rob works with emerging farmers. So, Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit how you got here? What brings you to be here doing this now?
Me, as in Rob Monroe.
In Rob Monroe, right.
Okay, I came out to Zambia from the UK in 1993, and I was involved in the commercial farming sector here. I was on a large pig and fish rearing operation, and then I was the general manager of a large horticultural export operation. That went spectacularly bankrupt in 2004, and I sort of parachuted, if you like, into the agricultural development world, where I've been ever since. And in the first 2 or 3, I mean, coming from the commercial sector, I knew how the commercial agricultural markets work here. Coming into the donor world, I found that there was a very much more of an emphasis on the donor itself taking on some of the functions of the market, the buying, basically saying that the private sector can't do these things. So, and the farmer is always being exploited by the private sector, so we'll do it. So the donor ends up being the marketing entity, or the extension agent, or the one that's supplying the inputs and the credits and so on, which is inherently unsustainable, because donor money always has a lifespan to it.
Correct.
When that lifespan finishes, then the farmers are left in the state that they were before. And the fact that the donor has been doing some of these operations means that you crowd out private sector participation in the market. The private sector doesn't want to move in because other people are doing it with subsidised money. So that started a whole drive, and it's taken a long time to get into sort of full gear, if you like, to try and develop a donor model where you're helping the private sector to take on those functions that it should actually be doing in the market, taking on the supply of inputs, the provision of information, the development of output markets that are beneficial for both sides of the transaction, and so on. That under a project which was funded by USAID, a 6-year project called Profit, we developed and fine-tuned that model, but it was very slow to take off. There was a lot of distrust on both sides, actually. The commercial sector reckoned that the smallholder doesn't have money. If you give them credit, they'll default, and they don't really grow anything, and it's too difficult a market to work in anyway. Likewise, the smallholder sector, coming out of a history of very strong government involvement in both the provision of inputs and the provision of an output market, generally held the private sector in a sort of distrust. They're out to exploit us, and so on. So some of those kind of trust barriers took a very long time to break down.
Tell me a little about, you mentioned emerging farming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've kind of identified that group as the group you're working with. Can you explain who that guy is in the community?
Yeah, well, within the smallholder sector of, let's call it around 1 million farmers here, there are around a third of those actually are net buyers of food. So they're not even subsistence farmers, they're one step back from subsistence. Then there's probably another third, and this is very rough figures, but about another third which are subsistence. They neither buy nor sell. Then there is the top third, if you like, are the ones who have the willingness and the ability to invest in their production. They have cash at harvest. They're able to use that cash to, if the inputs are there in the right form with the right amount of information at the right time, they are able to invest. Equally, they're able to they have the sort of entrepreneurial ability to be able to engage in output markets as well, commodity markets as well.
Okay, and so you talked about relationships. That what Musika is doing is creating a relationship between that group of farmers and the commercial.
Correct.
And you're working through the commercial side. So give me an example of how that might work. You know, how do you work through the commercial side? I think you mentioned the seed industry.
Yeah, well, let's take something like the seed industry. The smallholder has always been buying seed. So the government gives a lot of seed out, but then there's also been seed being bought by the smallholder, but relatively small volumes. And it's really been a kind of relationship where in the district town or in the provincial town there is a shop, the farmer goes in, he buys his seed. The retail entity has no real interest in engaging that market. If they come in, they can buy, and that's really the end of the story. So, but there's a huge information gap in the smallholder economy. The government extension service is pretty weak. There's a thirst for information. So we kind of had this idea that if you were able to develop a business model where you could aggregate demand and bring lots of farmers together, not into any sort of organised cooperative or so on, but around a commercial point. And in this case, we had developed this concept of an in-community agent who is somebody that's trained by the company, lives with the farmers, breathes with the farmers, works with the farmers. He's a farmer himself, but he now forms the sort of point between the company and its market. So he's continually promoting the products. He's able to aggregate orders, aggregate cash, and then the company can now deliver on the back of that, and then at the same time do sort of promotional activities and so on.
So that's similar to me buying seed in the U.S. from my seed company, where I go to a neighbor who's a seed dealer, and but he's also an expert. He tries the different varieties. He has some knowledge of new seeds and the like, and so the commercial system here starts delivering some of the products to the customer, and you're trying to make that system work.
Yeah.
Some of the things you've done to do that, you talked about having to actually start by training some of these individuals for the companies so to make this work.
Yeah. So the role that
has that been hard?
Yeah, the role we defined for ourselves under Profit, and which we've sort of carried on under Musika, is what we're calling market facilitation, market development, where basically we are not a player in the market, but we are helping to bring both sides together, to break down some of those trust barriers, to help, and also to help buy down some of that initial risk involved in making that leap of faith, I suppose, into a new market or developing a new business model or whatever. So at the beginning, I mean, some of our first work we did in that, to take the seed sector as an example, was physically drag the seed person out of his shop and take him to visit the farmers, and try and that was one of the first things that we did, was actually literally get them in our car and say, right, if you don't think the smallholders have got money, let's take you over here to people that are crying out for seed, but they just don't. So affordability is not a problem; it's accessibility is the issue, and product information and technology transfer.
Right.
And so
why buy this seed over this seed?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Why buy seed at all? Even why not just recycle last year's seed?
Right.
They don't. If someone hasn't been told, no, actually this gives you 4 times more yield than your old traditional variety. Why should they change? It's going to cost you money. You have to try and justify the expense on a return on investment. Somebody has to do that, and the government doesn't do it. NGOs do it to a very, very small extent, but probably lack a lot of that. Well, they do lack the commercial drive. So it has to come from the private sector.
Has to come from the private sector.
And in 2010, we didn't track it last year because the profit program had finished and Musika hadn't yet started. But in 2010, the volume of sales that in-community agent network affiliated to the agricultural input sector, the sales that they generated were over $4 million. So that anyone that's arguing that the smallholder sector doesn't have money, doesn't want to buy $4 million in a place like this is a lot of money, and it's worth the companies making the effort to engage that market. And I think we've broken, to a large extent, particularly on the agricultural retail side, we've broken that sort of curse, if you like now.
In a typical NGO fashion, you're hoping that once you break this curse and get the companies working with the farmers, that it's going to be self-sustaining, and this kind of a relationship will go forward.
Yeah, and us as facilitators here, we should be able to. I mean, it's our intention that we step out of that the relationship that we've helped develop. We leave, and it just continues on its own. And the testimony to that is that where there's been basically a sort of a one-season gap between when Profit finished and when Musika started, which was only a couple of months ago. The companies have all been out there selling. The agents have all been out there busy sort of promoting and selling. It's all been happening without us.
So in the NGO world, can we finish off with, is there one thing that really stands out to you? I mean, you're living it here. You live in Lusaka, you work for an NGO. Is there one thing that you have people in the U.S. or farmers in the U.S. know is we need to be doing here?
Well, I mean, necessarily I'm biased on this one because I believe passionately that the route to economic development is through developing the farmer in conjunction with the market environment around it. Just to focus on the farmer and train him or her, provide inputs, develop the sort of sustainable farming systems is fine, but it doesn't offer the sort of long-term graduation out of poverty that creating those sound and beneficial commercial relationships do with the market players in the system.
Well, thank you very much. It's a beautiful day here in the middle of February, and
it should be raining, by the way.
And it should be raining. Well, it rained last night, and you can see everything's green. We've got corn growing in the background, and I think you got a cassava plant there in front of it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Rob, it's been nice visiting with you, and thank you very much for this